We're back with the newsfeed late night, and our conversation continues now here on Newsroom Africa, channel 405, on commissions of inquiry into state capture. The Department of Justice and Correctional Services lists 15 commissions of inquiry that South Africa has undertaken since 2001. This, of course, excludes the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was set up by the Government of National Unity in 1994. So, the question we ask today, are commissions of inquiry effective? To unpack this with me tonight, I am joined by the UCT Public Law Associate Professor Kathy Powell, Bidvest Group Chair and University of the Free State Chancellor Professor Bonang Mohale, Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa Executive Director Nomzamo Zondo, and the Corruption Watch Head of Legal and Investigations Karam Singh. You can be a part of the conversation tonight by tagging us on Twitter at Newsroom405 or WhatsApp your questions and your comments to 072-110-5584. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time. I guess let's start here because we cannot, I suppose, avoid what has happened today. The president of the ANC, also president of the country, well, today he appeared there in his capacity as president of the ANC, appeared before a commission of inquiry into state capture. Professor Mohale, what do you make of his performance and in taking accountability on the role that his party played in what he says evidently is state capture?
So for me, I was emboldened by the fact that he admitted that the ANC has made mistakes, that indeed they have done some things wrong, but he was very clear that the people who stole money and looted were involved in state capture ought to be held to account in their own individual and personal basis, that the ANC has not sent anybody to go and steal and loot. Therefore, they need to face the music, which really speaks to probably the last day today of the step aside resolution that was taken in 2017. So also hearing today that the company that Pule Mabe is the director of, that we spoke and read about in 2017, that the SIU has finally decided to charge that company 4 years later. I think justice denied is justice delayed is definitely justice denied. Thank you, Thabo.
Professor Powell, what do you make of the president's performance today? It was said, of course, he cannot willy-nilly throw his organization under the bus because I suppose that will have political implications for him. However, he needed to be honest enough and accountable enough to the people of South Africa for them to believe what he's saying. Did he strike that balance?
I think you've put it exactly right. It was a balance, almost a kind of tap dance between trying to say, yes, we've made mistakes, I acknowledge them, and trying to save the ANC as an institution. As a result, he didn't admit to or even consider any of the structural problems in the ANC. That people are managing to get to the top, are managing to get leadership positions, questions of gatekeeping at branches, any of the ways in which the structures of the ANC actually help the corruption to happen. And there were a number of occasions when he was asked, how did that happen? And his answer would be, this mustn't happen again. But he avoided the details on how things had actually gone wrong. So, yes, you're right, we understand why he was trying to go easy on the ANC, but I think trying to cleanse the ANC as an organization is not entirely convincing, and he could have done more to take responsibility. Admittedly, that would have got him into trouble with his own party. Yeah. I suppose this is the problem that any ANC official is going to face.
Karam, we had a lot of, we are committing to do better going forward. Did the president account himself well today?
I think we will hear more of that. I think the president alluded to that in multiple occasions when he talked about how he would come back as state president and how he would provide some proper recommendations for the way forward. So I think there's still a lot to be said on that regard. But I would agree with what the other colleagues have said, that up to this point it was a bit short on details. It was a very polished performance. I think we have to give the president absolute credit for presenting himself in front of the committee. But I think there's the details in terms of what the actual taking up of the recommendations of the Zondo Commission are going to be, and and a broader kind of anti-corruption approach to dealing with issues around appointment and around catered deployment are the details that we're still going to need to hear.
Yeah. Nomzamo, which leads us to the question, I mean, with the type of performances that you see from those who are supposed to come and account at these commissions of inquiry, are these effective? Whenever a scandal of the proportion that grabs the attention of society comes to surface, what would say the safety valve for government is to put together a commission of inquiry into anything that is either political or that needs to bring some clarity around policy issues. And it's time-consuming, it's money-consuming. Is this a tool in itself that government should actually be leaning to as opposed to prosecutions and actually putting people behind bars?
Look, so the first thing about commissions is about the truth, right? About having a public narrative of any event. If you look at Marikana, the Marikana Commission of Inquiry was about setting the facts that the state could in the future claim that it was just a mistake, it was a tragedy. And every time what happens, you're right, we see a commission as a state sponsor say, we care. We see that this thing has happened, and because we care, we've set up this commission. I think the reality is that the commission is not the true test. The test is in implementing, as Karam said, is in implementing the recommendations. The test is, as you say, is in the action of seeing criminal prosecutions, because that's where you show that you care by taking action. You don't show that you care by simply setting up a public record. Having said that, I think for my clients with the Marikana families, it was important that that public narrative was put as an official account of the state of what happened in the massacre, because then they are able to claim justice based on those facts.
Yeah. Now, did that commission go far enough to unravel what actually happened, that past mystery, so that society can get to understand what actually happened? But not only that, did it go far enough as far as its recommendations to hold everyone responsible, accountable?
Definitely not, Thabo, and I think the family's complaints around the issue of criminal accountability, about the fact that the commission simply handed over the issue of criminal accountability over to the NPA, and we sit some 5 years later now, almost 6 years, without that being resolved. When it comes to the issue of compensation, it still hasn't been resolved. But it set a firm foundation where they could seek justice. And I promise you, if we did not have a Marikana Commission of Inquiry, we will not be talking about Marikana today. We will not be talking about it in the way that we're talking about it. Yeah. We will not be seeing it as a massacre if we didn't have a Commission of Inquiry.
Right. Professor Powell, you've said previously on this particular topic that the fact that recommendations are not followed could not be faulted on the Commission itself. The Commission has done its work, and whether or not the recommendations are followed, then that's an issue that you need to take up with government. Are they effective tools by themselves in at least going far enough to get government to want to act?
I think that commissions can be very effective if they're well run, because once you get to the point that government has to act, you want all of society to also want government to act. And if the commission has been run in a way that's open, transparent, people together find out the story, the commission has legitimacy, then by the time they come up with those recommendations, it's similarly to what Nomzamo said. If there hadn't been a commission, nobody would be talking about Marikana. Now we have a commission in which all the various ways that the state has been captured are presented. And I hope that process in itself gets enough public buy-in that the government is encouraged or pressurized to carry out the recommendations. And of course, I hope the recommendations take account of the structural changes needed, as well as just picking out individual people. I mean, that's the benefit of the commission, is it investigates a whole system, not one person. And that was the problem here, that the entire system was set up for corruption.
Commissions of inquiry are completely different to how a court is run. And as you put it, they're supposed to get society to get the facts and to be, I suppose, in agreement as to what actually happened on that day and who should be held accountable. But what we are seeing are differences. Whenever these commissions are actually put up and the processes are done, reports are released, we see differences in society about how the conclusion was reached, right? You're supposed to get an independent person to conduct this thing. Most instances is a judge, and it's supposed to depoliticize the whole thing. But it doesn't seem to work that way. Why such a disjoint, Prof?
I think that the tragedy with this particular commission is that a lot of people who realized that they were implicated in corruption set off very early on to delegitimize it. So a body that South Africa really needs and a process that we really need and we need it to work well has been attacked from the outset. Zondo's been attacked personally. There have been demonstrations outside commission hearings. Former President Zuma has claimed that Zondo is using the Constitutional Court to punish Zuma for him. So what's happened is that while there's been an attempt on the part of the Zondo Commission to uncover the facts, there's been a very strong campaign by people who fought to lose by the commission. There's been a strong campaign from them to delegitimize it. So I think this commission does hang in the balance.
Professor Mohale, they said commissions of inquiry, I've seen in some conversations, are instruments of impunity used to hoodwink society into thinking that something is being done while they are shielding all those responsible. What's your feeling?
Like everything else, it depends on the terms of reference. The authorities would like to keep the terms of reference very focused, very narrow, very sharp. The thieves themselves would like to extend them to be as broad as they possibly can. In the case of state capture, they would like to go back to 1652 when the dromedaries, Reicher, and the Goede Hoop came. And of course, the authorities will say, let's look at the 9 wasted years. But for me to show that the commissions of inquiry well constructed and absolutely well run, let's look at Judge Richard Nugent on his probe into SARS. This was damning as it led to the axing of the former commissioner, Tom Moyane. The inquiry into the fitness to hold office of 2 top national prosecuting authority advocates, Nomgcobo Jiba and Lawrence Mukhwebi, led by former Justice of the Constitutional Court, Yvonne Mukhor. And then, of course, the Commission of Inquiry into the PIC, looking into allegations of impropriety regarding various investments, which was presided over by former Supreme Court of Appeal President Lex Mpati. There we saw absolute results. Lastly, even the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, led by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, midway through that, by the way, it started in 2019, the sitting president said that evidence led, where it has been corroborated, can be used to start charging some people. Therefore, we're seeing a little bit of action. But I genuinely believe that as South Africa, as a people with great natural endowments, we have to take the top state capture miscreants to jail, because that's what builds confidence, trust, and hope. Yeah. You can't just loot billions of rands and then hope to get away with it. But of course, remember, the thieves have money. They will entangle you into the lower courts, the Supreme Court of Appeal. They'll take it to the Constitutional Court because they've got the money. And they would like it to go on for 10 years because some of them have done the math and they're hoping that they'll be dead by the time they are found guilty.
Let's talk about that a little bit. That the Nugent Commission, I mean, it started halfway through the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, and it finished before the Commission of Inquiry was finished. Yet, even the Nugent Commission of Inquiry has not actually led to anyone being held criminally liable. So the criminal liability has not been determined with that whole entire fact-finding mission. And that in itself loses some level of legitimacy in the public who then turn out and say, well, these things are a waste of time and money. Nothing actually ever happens.
So here you find a different organ of state, a different Chapter 9 institution that has been beaten into submission, the NPA, and absolutely petrified to act because 2 or 3 other actions that they did proved not to be so effective and efficient. Remember how state capture works. Firstly, it's about creating a shadow government. Secondly, it's about repurposing the state-owned institutions. Thirdly, it's about removing the good people and replace them with the bad people. Therefore, these institutions were hollowed out. The NPA was hollowed out. After 2017 in Polokwane, the first thing that this ANC-led government under the 9 wasted years was to kill the scorpions with the highest efficacy, efficiency, but also prosecution rate. And then lastly, of course, state capture is about going to the fire hose to capture national treasury, the PIC, probably the biggest private equity in the continent with about 2 billion, 2 trillion South African rands assets under management. Tabo?
Professor Kathy Powell, Professor Bonang Mohale, Nomzamo Zondo, as well as Karam Singh. Staying with us tonight. You're part of the conversation. Tag us on Twitter at Newsroom 405. WhatsApp your questions and your comments to 072-110-5584. The Newsfeed Late Night continues for you next. Back here with us here on the Newsfeed Late Night, and we continue in our conversation the value of commissions after the long delays and resources that are spent. Do we get to the bottom of what actually happened, and are people held criminally liable if they need to be? And is there any money or any value that is recovered from the investment that is made? Professor Kathy Powell, Professor Bonang Mohale, Nomzamo Zondo, as well as Karam Singh with us tonight. Karam, talk to me about whether or not that efficacy and necessity of commission has been adequately examined, and why we're still continuing with that piece of legislation that existed many years ago.
Well, I think it probably does need to be looked at again and does need to be reconsidered. And then I think it's because of some of the challenges that you've spoken about past commissions of inquiry being perceived as whitewashes, as processes which haven't delivered results. One can think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the fact that there wasn't a sufficient political will following that commission to actually follow through on prosecutions, follow through on reparations and the like. So, I think the challenges it's not the Commission of Inquiry in isolation, but it's then how it relates to the broader criminal justice system and other kinds of sanctions, such as blacklisting, such as asset forfeiture and recovery, and criminal prosecutions. So I think we do need to give some consideration about what is the future for commissions of inquiry and how they can be effectively integrated more broadly into a justice response. So they're not just about truth-seeking and about establishing a historical record, but also about providing substantive legal recourse. Yeah.
Speaking of legal recourse, 15 commissions set up to so far. We have, of course, spent billions on these. They are looked at in some quarters as cash cows for the legal fraternity. Legal profession makes a lot of money out of this. What is your thinking around that, and whether there is something that could be done?
Well, I think the legal profession is going to make money whether it's through commissions of inquiry or the extraordinary fees that we see advocates and senior counsel charging government on a daily basis. I think that's going to be a situation that we're going to sit with for some time. But I wouldn't say that it's money down the drain if the commission again has the right terms of reference, runs itself in an appropriate way, and then the findings and recommendations are taken up. Then it can have really significant systemic impact, and then we can see some value for the money that's spent in support of them.
Nomzamo, more often than not, even the release of the reports themselves has got to be, at instances, challenged in the courts through applications and so on and so forth. Just cite for us in the Marikana case why it had to take an application by one of the deceased mine workers' family to actually get the report released.
Look, I think it was probably an issue about what was happening politically at the time. The fact that Marikana is a political hot potato. it was quite distressing for the families who had to fight for the release of the report. I remember it took about 4 to 5 months to get it released, and them having to go to court in order to make that happen. It does then negate the point to begin with, which is to make sure that everybody has all the information. You would expect the state to make sure that reports are released instantaneously, and that even the recommendations that are stemming from those reports are shared with the public widely, because we've used public funds to get to that process. And I think, learning from Marikana, we are hoping that when the state capture is finalized and the report comes out, that there shouldn't be a gap, or at least too big a gap, between it being handed to the presidency and it being released publicly.
Right. And are we learning anything out of it as far as, for example, holding political power to account, right? We know that in the Marikana particular matter, the police commissioner then, Ria Piecha, was then suspended, and she lost her job. But it's normally said that none of those who held political power, including the current president, were held accountable in any way for what actually happened at Marikana.
And that's because not enough the truth didn't come out about their involvement. Right, so it's already about where the commission failed. We could not, even though in the commission the experts said these people would have had authority from the executive to take this action, and this was an expert for the police. We never got the details of what that authority looked like, and that's part of the reason why we haven't seen all of the political players account for Marikana. But we know that even the small players haven't taken accountability for Marikana. Yeah. The one thing that's been very, very important for me, if you look at the role of the commission vis-a-vis the post-commission moment. So in Marikana, we have a report that kind of says, that starts with the miners are to blame. So if you read the report, the very first paragraph says the miners are to blame. The miners have brought us here. And you have the post-report moment where we've seen criminal prosecutions of the police. If you look at the incident of the 13th, whereas if you read the report, it says the 13th, the miners brought us there. But when the NPA did their investigation, they're saying actually the police are accountable not only for the death of the miners, but they're accountable for the death of their colleagues who they put at risk with how they acted in the incident. Yeah. So for me, it's very, very important. I think Professor Kathy was speaking about this, about how as a public, we rally around the report, rally around the recommendations, rally around justice post the commission's report.
Professor Powell, the public having difficulty, I mean, to what Nomzamo is raising, for example, in holding politicians accountable, is the issue of evidence. A lot has been said, for example, about the current Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, that people just go there and it's just rumor mongering. There is no tangible evidence that is ever given by those who are testifying at the commission. Yeah, there are instances, one or two. For example, there's Tina matter where you can follow, there's paper trail. Busasa matter where you can follow, there is paper trail. But there is a whole lot of other he said, she said situation. For example, when you talk about the appointments of ministers into the executive, they say, well, the president usurped his power and gave it to a particular family. No tangible evidence is being provided so far.
There is, however, a lot of corroboration. That's important. So it's not just one person giving that evidence. And don't forget that evidence provided by an individual is also evidence. And the other thing that people need to understand about a commission of inquiry is it's not a court of law in the process that it follows. So a court of law has two lawyers fighting it out, and the judge sits back and doesn't take part until the end and then makes a decision. But a commission of inquiry is an inquisitorial procedure where the chairperson is actually doing the investigation. And that chairperson has a lot more discretion in what evidence to accept. So I don't think, even in a court of law, that things that are being called hearsay, for example, Nalisi Gigaba's wife saying that he had said to her that he got the money from X. I don't think that would count as hearsay even in a criminal court, because in a criminal court he would be the accused. Here he's not the accused, and it is hearsay. But hearsay evidence can be weighed in by the commissioner. I think in a way there's a lot of misinformation about what evidence means. It's got to be built up slowly, and one of the things that the Commission is going to look at the end is how many of the accounts match. If you have a whole lot of people all saying the same thing, and they've given, that's evidence that they've given, and the evidence matches, there's no contradictions between them, it's backed up by some documentary evidence, then you've got a case that there was corruption.
Right. We've got one big commission here in the country, the Arms Deal Commission, the Suriti Commission, which was overturned by the courts. How much harm does that do to the credibility and the legitimacy of commissions?
It shows how important it is that commissions are run in a transparent and open manner. But it also shows that the courts are there if a commission misbehaves. I mean, the Suriti report could be overturned because it had so transparently refused to hear evidence that was relevant, and it had not interrogated evidence that was clearly questionable. And then there's a court that you can go to that can say, hang on, you didn't go through the proper process. But we can know that for every commission. So if this commission survives that procedure, we know the commission's done an acceptable job. I mean, this commission has got so much more evidence to consider, but there is a way of checking whether they left out anything important. To my mind, at the moment, they really are being very thorough.
Karam, appointment of judges, most instances you would want to get a judge that is not a sitting judge because you believe that will afford adequate enough independence in terms of the judge and the processes that that judge will follow. However, this has not managed to depoliticize the matters in South Africa in particular. Why?
Well, I mean, I think Professor Powell has already spoken about the way in which this commission of inquiry has been particularly politicized, particularly by implicated persons who've attempted to delegitimize the work of the commission. So I think whether you've got a retired judge or a sitting judge, a judge is supposed to preside over whatever proceedings they're sitting on with impartiality under prescripts of the rule of law. So that shouldn't be an issue. But there'll always be, particularly in an inquiry relating to corruption, those that will seek to maneuver and politicize it and delegitimate the work in the ways that they have. So yeah, I mean, I think that was to be expected here.
Yeah, and as far as your feeling then goes around the decision making, right, that should follow coming out of this particular commission of inquiry, what would you say would be the right thing to do? Because I mean, the assumption is that government is trying to get information and gather exactly what happened. So what would be the right and correct message to send out in terms of the decision making that will follow this commission of inquiry?
Well, I mean, I think as we spoke about with the Marikana report, I think we would expect the report to be made public, for there to be, a thorough interrogation of it. I think it's going to be, the findings and recommendations are going to be very wide-ranging. They're going to be findings that are going to have to be taken up by the criminal justice system. There are going to be others that are going to have to be taken up by the civil service and by the public administration. And we're going to have to see real political will in terms of saying that we accept these findings as legitimate, and we're willing to implement the recommendations. So it's going to be across the board, but it's going to again test the political will of the ruling alliance, of the governing party, to show that they're really committed to fighting corruption and to taking the work of this commission seriously.
Are commissions of inquiry ineffective tools? We'll get your views in a moment here on the Newsfeed Late Night at Newsroom 405, otherwise on 072-110-5584. Professor Kathy Powell, Professor Bonang Mohale, Nomzamo Zondo, as well as Karam Singh. We're taking your questions next when we continue. Are commissions of inquiry ineffective tools? I'd like to get your views tonight. Do send us your tweets at Newsroom 405 or on WhatsApp 072-110-5584. We'll get to those questions in a moment. Professor Kathy Powell, Professor Bonang Mohale, Nomzamo Zondo, as well as Karam Singh with us tonight. Prof. Mohale, what can be done, right, to at least give more meaning to the Commission of Inquiry Act, to make that act a more meaningful piece of legislation?
So first of all, I think we need to look at the intent of these commissions of inquiry, and I think Usisi Nomzamo has explained and articulated this very well. If I take just one, the Commission of Inquiry into state capture, of course the intent is to help root out and defeat state capture, but also it's about defending and strengthening democracy. It is also about advancing this notion of ethical leadership, but also about boosting and enabling government to attend to much more important things of the state, like service delivery, inclusive socio-economic growth and transformation. This notion of liberal democracy, which is where commissions are coming from, rests on four legs. So the first, of course, is a free press so that we can get the reports and the outcomes of these commissions. Secondly, it's about the constitutional democracy. We say our constitution is the best in the world, not because we are clever, but because we stole unashamedly from the best in the world. Thirdly, it's about ensuring that we have an independent civil society. And then lastly, it's about ensuring that we do have the rule of law. So you steal, there must be consequences. But remember, like I said, the thieves are sitting with a lot of money. That's why the Guptas could hire a UK PR company and paid £100,000 a month to come up with terminology like radical economic transformation and white monopoly capital, when the ordinary electorate were saying, but you are involved in state capture here. So it's a machinery, it's a system, it's a process. It is both systematic and systemic, and it needs to be rooted out totally and absolutely.
Speaking of systemic and being rooted out, Professor Powell, procedural challenges is what we have seen also coming up in this Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. For example, serving of Section 3.3 notices, the processes of the protection of witnesses and so on and so forth. There's been a whole lot of other procedural issues that have come up and have made the public to look at the Commission and think, are they really doing this correctly? Is everything above board? What is your feeling on some of the procedural challenges and where we got it wrong?
I think some of the procedural challenges have been that the Commissioner's instructions were not obeyed. The procedure is his to decide. That is one of the features of the Commissions Act, and it's the feature of the regulations that Judge Zondo himself decides most of that procedure. For example, he was the one who decided that people cannot challenge evidence given by somebody else unless they produce an affidavit giving their version of what happened. That was one of his decisions on who may come to the Zondo Commission. So I think that he set up a good procedure to make sure that all sides were heard, that there was a chance to defend yourself if you were implicated, that you're given notice. All of that was something that was a system that he created for the purposes of this commission. And I think he was maybe not expecting that amount of evidence against people to come up, because that is then a huge mountain of notices that have to go out to people to tell them that they're implicated. I think even he was overcome by the sheer volume of corruption that we're uncovering through this commission.
Yeah.
Good job.
Are you saying that the judge, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, had said how the process will work, and those who were coming or who were saying we want to assist the commission wanted to impose their own way of how they would like things to be done?
The commission is set up that the chairperson is doing the investigation but is assisted by evidence leaders. And the commissioner works with those evidence leaders. But it's the commissioner's decision what procedure is going to be taken. And that procedure can be challenged. It can be taken on review if it is manifestly unreasonable or unfair, or unlawful. And that's only going to happen if it's procedurally unfair. But that hasn't happened. The problem has just been the implementation of measures that were meant to ensure that all implicated parties are given notice. And I think that the machinery of the State Capture Commission has been overwhelmed by the sheer amount of evidence that it's having to manage and pass on to implicated people.
Karama, I see you nodding. You agree with that the scale and the sheer magnitude of the decrease of corruption in this country became so overwhelming that the system itself found itself being overwhelmed?
I think that's probably right. I mean, I think that there haven't been significant procedural hitches that have broken the commission down. I mean, I think the thing that's been probably the most concerning has been the outing by quite unscrupulously by those giving testimony of whistleblower identities, when it's been clear that there was an attempt to protect the anonymity of whistleblowers. And I think that's a major concern, that we still have that kind of victimization and culture around the treatment of whistleblowers. But that wasn't about problems with procedures set down by the judge. That really was people flagrantly disregarding the instructions. So that for us was a major concern.
Yeah. Looking at, for example, what people are saying today after the president was appearing before the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. Does society have unrealistic expectations, Karam, of what commissions are supposed to do and what is supposed to come out of it?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's probably the expectations probably are not that high. I think, unfortunately, there is some fatigue, and I think there is some cynicism, particularly, following something like the Marikana Commission as a point of reference, where, so much energy gets put into the commission, the testimony comes out, we have this historical record, and then there's no consequences. Something that was quite telling about the Nugent Commission was that it was very focused, and Judge Nugent was issuing interim reports as the commission was going on, which then allowed them to remove somebody like Commissioner Moyane from the system while the inquiry was still going on. And I think that was the kind of consequence which was welcomed. But I think at this stage, people are holding their breath. I don't think that there's necessarily unrealistic expectation because there's a lot of cynicism, unfortunately. So I'd like to say that the commission will fulfill the expectations of the public, but I'm not sure what those expectations are.
Well, let's look at this question coming from Cleo Letsiri in Pretoria. Is saying, will the State Capture Commission ever untangle the conundrum of ensuring that rule of law and not rule by law prevails? The corruptible power of money is also at play here. I suppose that's one expectation coming from one member of society. Professor Mohale?
So for me, I think, let me start where Karam has left off, that society has a very low expectation of this Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, because the 15 others, not all of them resulted in successful prosecutions. But also, it's not misplaced, because I think we need to go back and remember that even in this sitting president's 5th State of the Nation address, he spoke about the 4 foremost overriding priorities. And the fourth of that, he really emphasized this notion of fighting corruption and strengthening the state. So some of these commissions are supposed to do that. Lastly, remember that this sitting president didn't start the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. The previous president was forced, and ultimately he succumbed to public pressure to initiate a Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, because his posture was, what is state capture? Could somebody please explain it to me? After it was explained to him repeatedly, ultimately he then created this. That's why we're gifted on Valentine's Day with the best gift ever, where he decided that he is going to ditch us as a president, and boy, did we celebrate. So I think I'm absolutely emboldened that in terms of following the procedure, the systems and processes, this president has been consultative, been participative, sometimes to a fault. It is frustrating, but it is the right way so that at the end, it's not seen as a personal agenda. Again, it's about the enforcement of the rule of law. It's about the system. It's about the process. It's not just about the individual.
Nomzamo, the families of those who are affected by the Marikana incident, do you think they'll have the confidence, or do they have that confidence that the commission process will ever have legitimacy in their eyes, at least?
Look, I don't think it ever will, right? And I'm saying this because on the day that the report was released, we met at Wits and all of us were heartbroken. The families were heartbroken, having seen small snippets of that report. But at the end of the day, that report is the reason why today, 9 years on, they're still fighting for justice. And that report is something that their children and their descendants in 100 years' time will know exactly what happened at that massacre. The important facts are in those 600 pages. Right. And that's very, very important.
Nomzamo, I appreciate your time. Nomzamo Zondo with Seri, Karam Singh with Corruption Watch, Professor Bonang Mohale, as well as Professor Kathy Powell. Appreciate your tweets and your messages coming through tonight.